Hey, it's the Procrastinating Professor here, and today I'm going to be posting a video a little bit off my usual schedule, which is usually on Mondays, simply because I got the opportunity to actually have an early access to the Bulge German book, courtesy of Blitz Minis. So I've been shopping from them for quite a number of years, predominantly buying my Flames of War stuff from them. So when I was given the opportunity to actually write an article, which I will link down below, as well as basically make content as I saw fit using the materials that they gave me, I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I do it? I get to work with a company that I have been a customer of for a while. I get to talk about my favorite faction, and I get to look at the new book ahead of time. So to me, this was a win-win-win. So today, as mentioned in the title, of course, we're going to be talking about the big cats of the book, simply because I think that's what a lot of us were pretty excited about. We're looking at the Tiger 2, the Jagdtiger, the Jagdpanther, as well as the Sturmtiger today. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about their stats in the game. I'm also going to be talking about the companies that they're from, and of course the platoons that they are in. And I'll also be talking a little bit about my opinions and my thoughts on actually using these in the game. So of course, if you have any opinions on these units, kindly do drop them down in the comments below. I do read it, and if you've seen my other videos, I do also comment and reply to many of these messages as well. Of course, if you're new to the channel, thanks for joining. I do put out a lot of painting tutorials and some videos like this from time to time, so please do consider subscribing to the channel for more Flames of War and historical content, and of course, my other content from all the other games that I play as well. So without further ado, let us start talking about the tanks. So we're going to start with the big one down here, right? The Tiger 2, which is a spectacular model. I sincerely look forward to the plastic kit with 3 vehicles in it, but let's talk very quickly about its stats first. So I think the easiest way to put things into perspective when we're talking about new units is to compare it with something that all of us are already familiar with. In this case, we're going to be comparing it to the Tiger 1, the original good old Tiger tank, which I believe all of us are very well acquainted with, especially since in late war, the Tiger is a very common pick. So how does this stack up against the Tiger? So Tiger 2 has a much higher front armor of 16, although very notably its side and rear remains as 8 and its top remains as 2. So that's something to keep in mind. The front is going to be very difficult for things to penetrate, but anything that flanks it or gets behind it is going to have a very easy time taking it out. Now its big gun, its 8.8 cm gun is 48 inches in range, which is longer range than the usual Tiger. And of course, it has a much higher anti-tank value as well, with an anti-tank of 17. Movement-wise, it is relatively comparable to a regular Tiger. Its tactical and terrain dash remain the same, although it's very slightly slower with the cross-country and road dash. But realistically speaking, given how long range the main weapon is, seems kind of unlikely that you're going to be dashing across. However, in the event that you do have to dash across, keep in mind that the Tiger 2 only has a cross value of 3+. So for all these changes, you pay about roughly 50% more points than a regular Tiger with the same stats, which is quite a substantial increase in cost for essentially an increase in frontal armor and a bigger gun. Very notably also, it is 4 times the price of an A8mm or 8.8 cm tank hunter platoon. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is that one single Tiger 2 costs the same price as, well, a full platoon of 4 A8mm tank hunter guns. I know it's not really fair to compare tanks with weapon teams simply because of course mobility and whatnot is different, but I think if you're thinking about taking them for essentially shooting the armor, it's worth considering the price difference. So all of these Tiger 2s come in platoons of 2 to 4 as per usual, and of course there are also the command variants, and within the book you get 2 different flavors of them. You get the SS versions, which are fearless, trained and aggressive, although of course the HQ does have Old Hand, which gives units in the formation within 6 inches tactics 3+, that's quite useful. And if you want the regular confident veteran careful Tigers, You can also get those as well, although they're approximately 15% more expensive, so it's something to keep in mind. So many of you are probably wondering, well, how many Tiger 2s can I squeeze into a single list? And here's the answer. If you were to take the Tiger 2 SS Tank Company, keeping in mind that the SS version is cheaper, you can field up to 6 Tiger 2s within a typical list. Although of course in this case, most of you would realize that 2 tank platoons usually not the wisest thing to do, but thankfully of course we can downgrade one of the platoons into just a Panther late SS tank platoon instead, therefore saving us 3 points as compared to 2 Tigers. And of course the difference in points will very comfortably buy us a platoon of, for example, Oswin AA tanks. That's definitely an option for a list for those of you who just want to cram as many Tiger 2s into a list as possible. The Tiger 2 SS Tank Company also comes with a warrior option in the form of Rudolf Mobius. He's essentially one of those fairly common ones that give you a reroll on your fail to hits on the main gun, in this case for 5 points. Now, what if you wanted to play with regular Tiger 2s instead of the SS version? Then unfortunately, the fit is going to be even harder. In this case, if you wanted to kind of max it out below 100 points, the best you can probably fit is 1 HQ Tiger 2, 3 more Tiger 2s, and then you're forced to take a platoon of 2 regular Tigers. So it's not as many Tigers for 95 points. And again, this is already kind of minimal. It's probably going to be something that's a little bit difficult to fit within 100 points. But if you play games that exceed 100 points, then this company is for you. And of course, again, it goes without saying that of course you can take these platoons outside the company as well. This is just us talking about the company. It's also worth mentioning that the Tiger 2 does gain access to the regular Tiger Ace command cards, which are essentially identical, except that now they also accommodate Tiger 2s. Keep in mind, however, that the Tiger Ace cards do not accommodate for the Jagdtiger or the Sturmtiger. It's just purely for Tiger 2s and of course regular Tiger tanks as well. Alright, let's move on to the next tank. Let's talk about the Jagdtiger. Now, Jagdtiger is of course basically functionally the biggest tank in the book. It's probably the biggest tank we're going to get rules for unless we start getting some what if rules for some other units. But the Jagdtiger is cheaper than Tiger 2, very slightly so. In this case, it only comes as a confident veteran careful version. There is no SS version. Very importantly, however, they are not Tiger Aces despite having the name Tiger in it. They do not have Tiger Ace, but they are of course self-propelled guns, which means that they have that essentially -1 penalty to their counter attack as well as their assault. And to top it all off, they only have an ROF-3 machine gun. In terms of armor, they are a little bit tougher in front with a frontal armor of 17, making them functionally impervious to things that can be thrown at them, but again, their side and their rear remains extremely vulnerable, and of course the top as well if your opponent has artillery strong enough to hit them from the top. They are even slower, however. They're 2 inches slower than Tiger 2 except for terrain dash, which means that they move at 8 inches per turn, which is probably not a big issue simply because their main gun is again 48 inches long, but in this case it is anti-tank 18, which again, it's so much firepower it becomes a situation where you need to honestly ask yourself, do you need anti-tank 18? And speaking of actual literal firepower, it has a firepower of 2+. The weapon is also brutal, forward firing, and slow firing. They also come with their own company. So in this case, again, if anyone wants to know how many Jagdtigers can you take in a single list, then again, you can take 6 for 94 points. But again, platoons of 2 tanks, maybe not the wisest thing, but thankfully we can very easily downgrade the second one into Panzer IVs or even Stugs if you wanted to save even more points. Jagdtigers also come in platoons of 2 to 4, which is pretty much to be expected. So in terms of command cards, you do have the option of downgrading Jagdtigers into Reluctant and Trained for -2 points per tank, which saves you quite a number of points using the list just now. You would be able to essentially squeeze in 1 more Jagdtiger, because a Jagdtiger is about roughly 16 points. The platoon again deals with fractions, so it's a little bit off from 16 points, but that's essentially the cost of a regular one. Of course, with this -2, it's only going to cost about roughly 14 points per Jagdtiger, so you can kind of do the math down there. In terms of warriors, you get 2 options which are almost identical, although Autocarius gets an additional +3 counterattack for 1 extra point over Albert Ernst, clocking both of them in at 6 and 7 points respectively. Alright, so moving on to the Jagdpanther. I think the Jagdpanther is one that a lot of people have been looking forward to, simply because it's one of those situations where those of us who like quote-unquote medium tanks, we kind of want the Jagdpanther to be good, and the regular Panther is not the most common tank if I'm being honest. So let's see how it works. Now again, in this book you're only given a confident veteran careful version of it, and it is functionally identical to a Panther except for a few differences. First of all, 9 front armor. This was very slightly surprising to me. I expected it to actually potentially be similar or higher compared to a Panther, but such is the case. And it retains, of course, the side and rear of 5, which makes it incredibly vulnerable from the sides as well. But again, keeping in line with all of the tanks from this edition so far, or rather all the big cats so far, you get this 48-inch gun with an anti-tank of 17, retaining its firepower 3+. And of course forward firing, because this is of course a self-propelled gun, which means that it has the penalty to counter-attack and assault as well as the ROF of its machine gun. And in this case, it's approximately 1 point cheaper than an equivalent Panther. Again, it's slightly off that because of fractions and whatnot. But it becomes a question of, well, do you want to actually take a Panther which has slightly less front armor but has a big anti-tank 17 gun? It's also 80% the price of a Tiger 2, which is probably something to keep in mind. And it is about 2.7 times the price of an A8mm Tank Hunter team. So again, you get almost 3 gun teams for the price of a single Jagdpanther. And again, it's not a perfect comparison, but if you're talking about anti-tank 17 guns, I think it's worth probably just bringing it up for the sake of comparison. Now for the Jagdpanther Tank Hunter Company, again, if you are thinking to yourself, well, how many Jagdpanthers can I squeeze into a list? You can squeeze 8 for 98 points. You don't have to. Again, you can of course downgrade the second one into Stux or Panzer 470 Tank Hunters or Hornies Tank Hunter Platoon, which is something that I find kind of interesting because when you look at it, for the most part, it is identical to the Jagdpanther, but of course, there are some very significant differences, right? It has a worse machine gun, it is even slower, and for 2/3 the price, you end up with something that functionally barely has armor. So again, it's up to you. It is an option. The only reason I'm bringing this up is simply because this is a choice in the list other than the Stug and the Panzer 4 Tank Hunters. But of course, this unit brings the big anti-tank 17 gun to bear. An argument can be made whether you need so many anti-tank 17 weapons, but this is just FYI. Last but not least, of course, you have the Sturmtiger. Sturmtiger is the one that I was looking forward to the most, mainly because I love the design. The Tamiya kit when I was young was super rare and impossible to find. I really always wanted it. But anyway, let's talk about this tank in the game. Now, this tank brings 2 new special rules to the table. The first thing is that it is, of course, functionally a moving piece of artillery that points its big artillery gun directly at its targets. So keeping that in mind, in this case, it can actually hit nest and bunker teams direct, and you don't need to reroll successful to hit rolls for only having 1 to 2 of them firing, which is quite important because of course these only come in platoons of 1 to 2, and it would be pretty terrible if we had to reroll successes for that. However, the downside of course is that you only get 1 range in attempt. So what do we get here? Platoons of 1 to 2 mean that they can be honestly easily splashed into pretty much any list. It is 2 times the points of a broom bar each, so it's not super cheap, neither is it ultra expensive. It is of course on the higher end unsurprisingly, simply because number 1, it comes with pretty high armor. 15 front armor may not be as impressive as the Tiger 2 or the Jagdtiger, but still, it's pretty high, and the 8 on the side and rear and 2 on top keeps it comparable to a regular Tiger from there. It is just as fast as a Tiger, but it does have a crossover 3+. And speed again is one of those things, do you honestly need to worry about it too much simply because it has 56-inch range. Unsurprising, it is an artillery piece after all. It is an anti-tank 4 with firepower of 2+, and it has the aforementioned special rules that I introduced in the previous slide. It is of course forward firing, and it is also brutal. So this unit brings something which frankly feels a little bit different to the table. It brings a mobile artillery piece, an extremely big artillery piece, which would threaten almost pretty much anything. So what are my concluding thoughts on all of this? If I'm being completely honest, here's my thoughts, right? Do you honestly need so much anti-tank firepower? And if you do, can you afford to actually protect them? Because again, especially when we're talking about the Tiger 2 and the Jagdtiger, you're paying quite a lot of points for something that's extremely fragile from the side. It is as fragile as something that costs way less. The Sturmtiger also kind of suffers from this as well, but the Sturmtiger of course has an even longer range. It's going to take a little bit longer for your opponent to get on the side, and you don't need to take so many of them. The Sturmtiger coming at a platoon of 1 makes it something that you can just easily drop a single platoon into a list and call it a day, whereas for the others, if you want to take a platoon, you're going to have to take typically honestly 3, right? Because very rarely do I see platoons of 2 tanks. And that's a substantial amount of points, and you're going to have to protect them. Now, do I think that they are bad? I wouldn't know, simply because, of course, we do need to test it out. But one thing is for sure, I'm definitely going to be buying and painting some of them. That goes without question. And I look forward to, of course, hearing everyone's thoughts on these units down in the comments below. If you want me to cover anything else from the book, I definitely can. But thank you all for watching thus far. Of course, if you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing, and I also have all my other social media links down below. So with that, thank you all and take care.